It's totally fictionalized, this idea that the Griselda character is going to help Amilcar by eliminating a witness.
It might not be too far from the truth. I mean, I'm not going to say that, but...
Oh, okay.
Between...
You just did.
I mean, not really. I'm saying...
Griselda Blanco, a flamboyant woman nicknamed La Madrina, or Godmother.
A Colombian drug baroness.
A cocaine queenpin of sorts.
I would characterize her as the epitome of the cocaine cowboys.
Más conocida como la reina de la cocaína.
Griselda Blanco has been charged with 3 murders.
Griselda Blanco.
Griselda Blanco.
For the last 20 years, I've watched other people tell the story of my mother and our family. Now it's my turn to tell the real story.
This is The Real Griselda with Michael Corleone Blanco, Episode 3, talking about Episode 3 of the Netflix series Griselda.
I don't know about any of you, but I'm not gonna fucking give it away to those motherfuckers for nothing.
This episode is called Mutiny. It's got a double meaning, you see.
Of course.
Yeah. So, things I dug about this episode, there's a Burdines bag right at the beginning. That's some fun Miami
Thank God
shit.
for Burdines.
It's the Florida store.
Yeah.
Towards the end of the episode, there's a shot with Dario and Griselda on what is supposedly like the mezzanine of the mutiny, and it's a beautiful, gorgeous shot. There's like this mosaic. It's really pretty. And I like that the mutiny is a location in the series, but I wish it was more of like a character, like it had a little bit more of kind of a personality in the art direction, and also like it had it was such a dynamic place that I wish
the place in Miami to be in the 1980s, late 70s, early 80s.
The building's still there in Coconut Grove, and there's actually an 8-part dramatic series called Hotel Cocaine that's dropping, I guess, later this year on MGM Plus, starring...
I saw the book based on that. It's based on, I think.
Not really based on.
Oh, it's not.
No, I mean, there's that great book, Hotel Scarface.
Yeah, Hotel Scarface.
This is Hotel Cocaine, like in Coming to America.
Yeah, Coming to America.
See, they're McDonald's. I'm McDowell's. Huh?
It's kind of like the Big Mac versus the Big Mick.
Yes.
It's, 2 all-beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions.
But they use a sesame seed bun. My buns have no seeds.
That's Hotel Scarface. This is Hotel Cocaine. But it does star a couple of Miami boys, my friends Danny Pino and Yul Vasquez. Let's do a fact check on Episode 3 of Griselda on Netflix.
Let's do it.
Let's talk about some of the characters that are introduced or have more of a featured role in this episode. We have Rafa.
Los Ochoa son los proveedores más grandes de Colombia, ¿no es cierto?
In this episode, she's meeting Rafa. Griselda, character, is meeting Rafa for the first time.
Griselda Blanco. He oído mucho de vos, mucho gusto.
Mucho gusto.
In basically, I guess, what is 1979-ish or something.
Which is not accurate because they grew up together in El Barrio Antioquia. I believe Rafa was from Belén and my mother from El Barrio Antioquia. So they knew each other almost as long as El Capitan and her knew each other, as Alberto and her knew each other.
I'm sorry, their second husband.
Yeah.
Right. And so as the documentaries go, they are childhood friends,
of course,
basically.
Yes.
Rafa and Griselda, they were childhood friends.
So Rafa gave everything to her.
And this is, I think, also something that gets lost, because like in episode 1, she meets Chucho Castro at a diner in Miami for the first time. But all of these folks, just
He's
like
also
Papo
from
Mejia.
the same neighborhood.
Right.
They all from the same neighborhood.
And because this is such an extraordinary story of an international, cocaine trafficking organization, people don't realize it's also like a small town kind of story,
but
too.
You know what's so important, and I'll give them that. That was pretty cool, the fact that they left something to be thought of, because if us, that we all know the true story, you're like, wait, how did they all meet here in Miami? And they all became buddies overnight. The truth is, they all grew up in the same neighborhood, because remember, similar to other mob movies or like that, like you remember Mobsters back in the 80s? Lucky Luciano and Maya Lansky, they basically grew up in the same neighborhood, a couple blocks apart. That was the same thing in El Barrio Antioquia. Most of the nucleus of my mother's friends and organization that later did what they did here and became the Cowboys, most of them knew each other since elementary, since junior high.
But also that's the only way you really trust anyone in a multi-billion-dollar consignment business where the product is $50,000 for every 2.2 pounds. Like, you have to know people. You can't just meet some stranger on the street and be like, okay, I'm going to trust you with my cocaine. They were
and it's also
friends.
because if you get lost with my money, I can find someone in your family, basically back in the hood, you know?
Right. Rafa, inexplicably in this episode, lives on Norman's Key in the Bahamas, where your mother goes to meet him. I'm guessing that's just like some Cocaine Cowboys fan fiction or Narcos fan fiction, because I think it's pretty well known that that island was
Carlos Leiter's.
Right, owned and operated by Carlos Leiter. I mean, I think it's in Narcos, like it's in Blow, certainly. Yep. It kind of feels like in that fan fiction way, it's like, oh, let's just lay some landmarks so fans of the narco genre will be like, oh, I recognize this person or I recognize that place. Did your mother ever go to Norman's Key that you know?
Not my mother, but a lot of people that worked for us, you know, they landed there. My brother Cheeky would use some of Carlos's jets and planes also.
Carlos, I mean, he was kind of operating with impunity in the Bahamas. I mean, he was literally paying off the prime minister. Everybody knew what he was up to there, and it wasn't until Reagan squeezed the Bahamians and basically said, you got to stop this shit. That's when he went back to Colombia, and eventually they caught him. And he basically becomes the first and only of the Medellin cartel OGs to get extradited to the United States. Also, we meet at that same meeting, that same fictitious meeting with Griselda and Rafa, we meet Max Mermelstein.
He's smart. And the Ochoas will like a green the ground. ¿Sí o no, Max?
I'm a fat Jew engineer. Makes me an unlikely suspect.
The only reason Max is there is because his wife is Colombian and she knew Rafa. That's why they and he spoke Spanish, but that's why they trusted this guy as opposed to just this dude sort of, you know, just this gringo just kind of popping up out of nowhere.
I have explicit memories. I remember Max going to our house in Palm Island. Like, I remember these things. And yeah, Max was key to the organization. I mean, he was Rafiko's man.
And I understood your mom hung out quite a bit at Christina Fashions, his wife's boutique. Is that true?
Yes, 100%. And there was another salon nearby that she'd go to. A couple of days, I heard a story of her entering the salon and everybody leaving because they were so spooked that Griselda had just walked in.
We talked in the last episode about the police being on her radar because she was certainly on their radar. June Hawkins, who was later a member of the Centac team, bilingual. She is working a lot of sources on the street. She's writing a lot of the intel reports for first the Metro-Dade Police Department, later part of the Centac unit. In the series, there's an almost like Hannibal Lecter, Clarice Starling, like awareness of each other. But did she know who her antagonists were? Did she know who Raul Diaz or Al Singleton or June Hawkins were?
From what I understand, she was aware of who they were by name and all. But I think she was more aware of Bob Palombo before that.
So Bob Palombo was a DEA agent.
You know, I said, if I ever get her, I'm going to give her a kiss on the cheek.
He is in the Netflix show. They don't really say his name, I don't think, but there is a guy playing him, kind of looks a little like him, who is a part of the Centac team and ultimately does arrest her in California, which is in, spoiler alert, by the way, in episode 6. But he was after her since New York.
Yes.
Since the Operation Banshee indictment in 74, 75.
There was a fugitive warrant issued for her. I lost track of her from the time of the indictment until I was transferred to Miami.
She knew who he was, and she knew eventually maybe he was going to catch up with her?
I think she understood that he was in Miami.
Okay.
And I think he had an issue because he couldn't do freely what he would do here in Miami in was hunting her down. I guess because, you know, my mother had already vertically integrated herself into the community. You know, here in Miami, she would hide in plain sight, and we'd frequent all the malls. We'd be up and down. So I think she had an understanding, and I don't want to say with who, but with locals. You know, probably uniforms. I think she had an understanding that every month Here's your check. Leave me alone.
This makes a total of 3 Miami officers arrested over the weekend.
Today's arrest came as 7 other Miami officers went on trial accused of ripping off other cocaine dealers and for dealing drugs themselves.
The so-called cocaine cops have been charged with conspiracy, drug trafficking, and racketeering.
The tally shocking. 40 current or former Miami police officers arrested or suspended in the last 2 years.
There's a lot of talk about territory in the episode. How literal is that? Meaning that, like, there's a lot of people operating in and around Miami. There was enough business to go around. There was at least at some time enough cocaine coming in to supply people. Not that people weren't ripping each other off, but I just mean, like, how literal. I mean, it was just like, this is my tennis club or this is my hotel or.
You control your clientele. Where are you at? That's your clientele. It's not necessarily your territory, but if you have 10 loyal customers, those customers are yours, and nobody can hop the fence to talk to those customers or try to feed those customers if you guys have that, what we say, sociedad, that partnership. So you see that a lot, especially back in the days. You would see that. These are my partners. Don't mess with my partners. That's more the territorial type of thing.
Right. So you're getting your supply and you're supplying those people. Those are the people you're selling to.
And my mother, what is true about that is that she was very territorial, and she did claim Miami as her territory. When they had the commission in Medellin that everybody met to set up, listen, this is who's going to distribute, this is what's going on, and Pablo had taken over the realms of the Medellin drug cartel, so he was setting things in play and putting impuestos, taxes on everybody. The law was that in her territory, in Miami, nadie le decía nada. Nobody could tell her what to do.
There's a meeting scene in this episode where she meets with all the local drug dealers, including Papo Mejia and Herman Paneso, and they're kind of like, should we take this buyout offer from Rafa? Because Rafa's going to move in, basically representing the Ochoas to bring, their cocaine, kind of control the routes, the smuggling, the wholesaling. It seemed a little outlandish. It seemed like a little movie-like. It didn't seem to ring true, but you're saying that there was, in fact,
in Medellin.
Okay. I always thought that was, okay.
It was real. It was real. They did have the meeting. Mind you that my mother, it was a type of fly-in, fly-out type of thing, but she was called for the meeting, and she did attend. She came right back to Miami. Nothing happened to her, and she laid down the law. She said, okay, I see what you guys are doing, and it's okay. Just know that you can't tell me what to do in Miami. And you still have to go through me in Miami. And yeah, that was the law. And even Rafa understood that.
But Rafa did come here and operate, not Norman's Key like in the show. But
he
Rafa
was a monster. Ran the city as well, yes.
But lived in South Florida and worked in South Florida.
We were neighbors. We had in Bal Harbor. We lived in the buildings right next to each other. One of my mom's penthouses was right next to Rafa's. I was speaking to his daughter about it.
How did that coexistence work out?
It was, imagine, you're becoming millionaires with the people you grew up in the hood with, in El Barrio Antioquia. They loved each other. It was like breakfast, lunch, and dinner, same people, same atmosphere. The Latino community, we're very united. So since they had this bond from decades ago in Medellin, honestly, it was like we were always at events together. They were always visiting. Si tuviéramos almuerzo, if we had lunch next, if we were in the penthouse, she would call over, "Kyo, Rafa, you guys gonna come eat?" Or they would invite us to his house to eat. They were best buddies. It's sad what money does, but they all had a great bond.
I mean, is Rafa supplying
Rafa,
your mother through the Ochoas
as well?
Okay,
of
so
course.
He has his own people that she has the people she's selling to, as you would call it. That's the territory, basically. They're customers.
Yes,
and then he had his own customers. Just sort of explain how that was functioning.
They would feed. They're all basically their consumers, right? They each fed their consumers, and if you ran out of dope because you just sold 500 keys, but Rafa had an extra 300 and your people needed 300, then my mother would hit Rafa and tell him, let me get those 300 at retail price, at wholesale price, and then bust it retail. And that's what it was. All of the Colombians back then, they would feed each other to an extent. Mind you that the competitive level is always there. And back then in Miami as well as Medellin, whoever had the most money usually was the one in power. My mother didn't like competition too much, and she liked for everybody to know that she didn't have a boss and that she pushed more weight than everybody. I used to tell her, Mom, but Pablo this, Pablo that. She'd be like, no, he didn't. And I said, like, what do you mean? She's like, I did that. And I said, Mom. She goes, no. I go, but wait, but he's the boss, man. She goes, watch what you say. I've never had a boss. Patrón, Dios y Madre. We say Patrón, Dios y Madre. Patron, boss, and mother. God and mother. Patrón, Dios y Madre.
The Netflix series begins with a Pablo Escobar quote. We never see or hear from the character of Pablo Escobar again in the Netflix series. The quote is, "The only man I was ever afraid of was a woman named Griselda Blanco." Where did you, is that real? Is that, where did you ever remember hearing that for the first time?
I heard it since I was a kid. He didn't fear no man. He respected my father. And then later on, one of my father's sons becomes one of Pablo Escobar's chief sicarios in the late 80s, early 90s.
What was the relationship? There's, again, a lot of legend around this, the relationship between your mother and Pablo Escobar.
It was one of a mentor to her prodigy. Pablo was a prodigy to the First Guard, even though he became part of the First Guard. But Pablo was still... he was still in the smuggling trade, the contraband in Colombia. Remember, most of drug trafficking that was invented in Colombia, it was invented by the contraband style of bringing in work across the border. The only way you can get goods and import radios, TVs, you'd have to be un contrabandista, contraband. And a lot of the people that got into drug trafficking, it was because they were good at the contraband, at smuggling stuff from the other borders, Peru, Bolivia, Ecuador, you know, to get it to Colombia to sell other products. When the drugs came into play, they would have to somehow get the drugs into the metropolitan area of Medellin. Pablo's boss was one of the best smugglers. He gets into the drug trade with my mother. Pablo would steal a lot of cars. He was a younger criminal making his way up the corporate ladder. My mother and my father kind of took him under their wing because they saw he had balls, he had heart. There'd be times, I heard a story once when they were about to close the neighborhood to actually do what they had to do. My father and my tios and the people from Pereira, you know, they had to enforce her law. Pablo comes with a fleet of stolen cars that he was scheduled to drop them off, you know, in Barrio Antioquia for my father and my mother to purchase from them. And my father told him, no, you're late. And Pablo said, no, but I just came from Envigado with everything. And he said, do me a favor, grab all your cars and get out of here now, because we're about to light up this whole neighborhood. Pablo already knew who she was. I mean, everybody did. They call her La Doña, La Mera Mera, La Colosa. And if you wanted to get into cocaine dealing, which was this new thing, you had to take care of Griselda. You had to bow down to Griselda. You had to put in your hours. He kind of tells her his complications with his boss. So my mother kind of nudges in, you know what? One day, you're going to have to get rid of him. Because if not, he's going to get rid of you. The day you do that, you're going to learn about this business. And this is the future.
You're talking right now mid-late 70s, right now, roughly?
No, early 70s, late 60s, yeah.
In the series on Netflix, there is a character, Arturo, who is the accountant, really, to the Griselda character. I imagine he might be a composite character based on maybe several people or anyone in particular. Do you recognize that guy, that character?
We had El Compadre, that I think he was my mother's accountant as well. Matter of fact, he was Chiqui's godfather. He dies in the 90s of old age. I think they're basing that character on him.
This guy kept the books?
Yes.
I mean, is that what literally what he did? You knew where every kilo and every dollar was?
I mean, from what I understand, yeah, and he was in charge of, here in Miami when he was younger, he was in charge of my mother's accounting, all of it. The stash houses, who would get, for example, the character of Carmen to get the money to buy the real estate and all that, because, I mean, it's no secret. My mother had a lot of real estate in all South Florida, up to New York. We had a lot of real estate, and then California.
Actually, in episode 5, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the real estate. We'll talk about the stash houses, how that worked. There's a scene in which the Griselda character meets Rafa for the first time in 1979 or whenever it is in the world of the show. It's a little unclear. Meets Marta Ochoa as well, like for the first time ever, which strikes me as bizarre.
Yeah, because they all known each other since El Barrio Antioquia. You get it? Los Ochoas originally from El Barrio Antioquia as well. We all are.
And then...
I mean, I'm from El Poblado, but my family's from El Barrio Antioquia.
And then Rafa offers the Griselda character...
15 mil, I think.
A buyout.
Yeah.
A buyout.
$15 million. And you walk away clean.
Is how...
Billy, do you know what 15 mil was to my mom? That was pocket change. You think my mom would take a payout of 15 mil? No, my mother, it was different. I mean, I've heard stories of people gifting her $1 million as a signing bonus to work with her. And she would require that. Even when we got into this business, my mother would require a gift.
Were buyouts a thing?
Yes, they were. A lot of people would put a price. You remember the 1980s and 90s when you saw the drug dealer with the beeper and he would give his friend the beeper and said, you could buy my beeper. You could buy his catalog with all his clients and everything. Same thing with routes and drug couples. If you didn't want to kill that person, steal their routes and do a power move, you would offer them a buyout. Look, I already know how you're doing it. I'm part of it. Why don't we just get to an agreement? And a lot of people would sell their routes. A lot of people would get killed for their routes. Mind you that she invented the routes. But a lot of people took over certain routes when she fled Colombia because she wasn't there to enforce the ports. She wasn't there to enforce some of the islands. That's how you see later on in the late 80s, 1990s, and then even present-day millennium, the Colombian cartels change, and you see certain entities that govern the ports and the way out of certain ports. Cali Cartel had their ports. Pablo had Cartagena. You know, everything that was going out of Cartagena was his. Then that means you have to pay him taxes. Well, Griselda was the one that invented those laws. But then she flees to Miami, and she can't enforce them. So now you have a wave within 2 to 5 years of a new school, which is called the New Guard. Griselda was La Vieja Guardia, the old guard, the original guard.
In the Netflix series, the Griselda character murders Alberto Bravo at the end of the first episode, but it's done in a very kind of almost self-defense kind of honestly, episode 1 is kind of like Enough with Jennifer Lopez. That's kind of how, I don't know if you remember that movie.
Yes.
It's like fighting abused wife, and then she kind of trains to, right. So it plays a little bit like that. But in this episode is where, episode 3, the Griselda character starts to get a little cold, or colder, in terms of ordering hits. Here, it's totally fictionalized, this idea that she's going to try to help Amilcar by eliminating a witness to a murder that he committed.
I'll kill him for you.
And so
it might not be too far from the truth. I mean, I'm not going to say that, but
oh, okay.
Between
you just did.
I mean, not really. I'm saying it might not be too far from the truth that in that time, my opinion is that a lot of drug traffickers did favors for each other. So, hey, Billy, is this guy a headache for you? I would gladly take him out for you. Just give me 50 kilos in the near future. And that shit would happen. You get it? It was a way of showing respect. Hey, is that a headache? Why? I got a little aspirin for you. You want me to handle that?
That I get. That it's not something that would not have happened in real life, but I don't believe that it did. I don't believe that your mother murdered a witness or had a witness murdered for Amilcar. I don't believe that
I know of. Not
all right, that you know of and that I know of. But the murder in the series seems to be somewhat inspired by a real life murder that happened in May of 1982 in the road section of Miami, the Lorenzo murders.
Alfredo and Griselda Lorenzo were found shot and killed in June of 1982 in their home.
In the house, there are 2 young girls, very young girls, and then there's like a toddler or a baby in the house.
Bodies were in separate rooms of the house, and whoever committed the homicide left the children right inside the house with the dead parents.
The original one is Rivy and Miguelito enter the premises.
That's correct.
I thought that was King's Court.
I don't believe Rivy, or Rivy at least claims he wasn't present for the Kendall 6 murder.
They call it the Kendall 6.
6 people were killed in a townhouse.
And that was 6 murders.
That's right.
Yeah, this was a double homicide, which is also a double homicide of a husband and wife in the Netflix series, and there is this 6-month-old baby, which there also was in King's Court. They seem to be conflating several events into this one fictitious event. Also, there's this moment which is similar to Rivi's telling of the Lorenzo double murder, where in this case it's Dario. Dario calls Griselda in the show and basically says, "What do you want us to do?"
¿Qué quieres hacer?
And she kind of very coldly says, "Do what you've got to do." Not dissimilar to the way Rivi tells the story of the Lorenzo homicide.
Miguel tells me, Griselda told me to kill everybody in the house. That's what we're talking about. Some of the kids left.
Rivi talks about in the Cocaine Cowboys documentaries and his depositions that he and Miguelito the Marielito, kind of butt heads over whether or not they're going to murder the children, and Miguelito claims that he's going to get $5,000 a head from Griselda for the kids.
That kind of pisses me off, and I'm going to tell you why. I'm going to be very clear about this. You guys mentioned that a lot in Cocaine Cowboys as well, and a lot of people mention that a lot in Cocaine Cowboys a lot. What a lot of people don't understand is that I know my mother wasn't a saint, and I'm clear about that. But urban myth is a motherfucker. And let me tell you something. Do you really think that a lady that had 200 godchildren and 4 children of her own would greenlight murder on kids the age of her kids? No. And that's the thing. I've heard stories about when she slapped the shit out of Rivi when he entered the room about another murder that we all know of that I'd rather not mention. But I've also heard stories of my mother being so disgusted with so much killing. But when you're when you have this industry already running like an oiled machine, everybody has their key part in it, but everybody starts becoming power hungry. My father and my uncles, they came, you know where they came from. They came from Pereira. Like I told you, those men killed and ate from the dead. That's what they say. Matan y comen del muerto. That there was a point in time that my mother was just there, and they were taking over everything. They were the power struggle. They were Dayland. They were doing this. They were doing that. They were telling Rivi what to do, and then Chiqui comes into the picture. When we go to war with Rafico, then it was no limits. You get it? Then shit hit the fan.
You opened up a lot of cans.
Yes.
Of a lot of worms.
I hope I did.
Right there. So first thing I want to say is, what do you think the incentive is for people to lie about your mother? They're telling the truth to a point, but then you seem to think it goes a step too far.
I think it's basically feeding into that myth that this, and that. And basically a lot of people don't want to confess everything they did.
The other thing I'm not going to let you get away with is that you kind of brought up this thing about your mom smacking Rivi and then said, I don't want to talk about that. I would like to hear that. I'll trade you Rivi stories if you want. I got a Rivi story. Should I go first? Or
you go first.
I'll go okay, I'll go first. So we're shooting the Cocaine Cowboys. We're filming. Let me not use that term.
Don't use the word shoot.
Yeah, we're filming the Cocaine Cowboys documentary. And we are going into Florida State prisons. I think we went at least 2 of them to visit and then film the Rivi interviews. The first documentary that we made that went to the Sundance Film Festival, we had a problem with our distributor. It was pretty stressful, and we were dealing with it while we were trying to make this Cocaine Cowboys documentary, kind of scraping money together and running around and filming it. And one day we were setting up the equipment. The guards had brought Rivi in, and so Rivi was just kind of chilling. He says to Alfred, it's my producing partner, Alfred Spellman. He goes, Alfred, kind of waves him over. They're kind of whispering to each other. He's like, you look troubled. You look stressed. Are you okay? And Alfred says, we've been dealing with this bullshit with our distributor on our first documentary. They kind of took the movie. They won't give it back. They won't pay us for it. We don't really know what to do about it. I'm kind of dealing with the lawyers and everything. And Rivi goes, somebody owe you money?
That sounds like Rivi.
And Alfred goes, well, yeah, kind of. He goes, no, you call my guy in Chicago. You just hit him up and he'll take care of you. You just let him know, you just give him an address. And Alfred's like, What's funny is that like he laughed and it was cathartic because he was so stressed about it. But he was like, okay, I guess if all else fails, I can always go the Rivy route with it, and it made him a little less stressed about it. But that's funny. That's
funny you say that because he was a bunkie with one of my close friends, and he told my close friend, "You got any problem with anybody in the yard? You're Michael's best buddy, right? Yeah. Don't you do nothing. You just point him out." That's what he told my buddy.
Episode 4, it kicks the Cocaine Cowboys fan fiction into overdrive. I'm excited to talk about it. Michael Corleone Blanco, author of My Mother, the Godmother, now available at mymotherthegodmother.com. Shout out.
If you get in a jam in California, Ace Deuce will bust you loose. I got El Primo. I got some candy for you. I got that from Blanco Family Fincas and Packaging Co. Ace Deuce will bust you loose.